Welcome back to another episode of The Job is Easy, The People Are Not. Today we're going to talk about one of the top 10 smart skills, adaptability, with one of the most adaptable people that I know in the world, Emily Preiss. Not only a colleague of mine, but probably one of my top 3 favorite people in the world. I don't even think that my family qualifies in the top 3, Emily, so I'm so happy you're here.
Thanks, Loredana. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I'm going to go straight into the conversation, and one of the reasons why I wanted to invite you on this journey is because I think of you as one of the most adaptable people that I know, and we're going to talk a little bit about what makes you so adaptable. But let's start with a simple definition of, in your words, what do you think adaptability is?
So I think for me, adaptability is all about how we engage with change. So it's our tolerance for change. It's our willingness to evolve and grow. And I think a key word is willingness, because I think adaptability is all about our attitude and our mindset when we're sort of navigating uncertainty, when we're out of our comfort zone. But one of the really interesting things for me when I'm thinking about adaptability is this kind of paradox in the human condition, right? Because on the one hand, adaptability is like our fundamental survival skill. Like we are hardwired to adapt and to evolve and to survive. And on the other hand, I think naturally we're also quite resistant to change. We can feel threatened. So I think it's sort of reconciling those two things that kind of make adaptability a really sort of fascinating skill set.
Yeah, that's really interesting because we haven't seen many dinosaurs lately, right? They couldn't really adapt. But on the second point that you made, it's true. Humans don't like change, or they don't like change just for the sake of change. So I've known you for a while. I know, like I said in the beginning, I think you're extraordinarily adaptable. But can you maybe tell us a little bit about how your personal journey brought you to a point where I can say about you that you're one of the most adaptable people? What wired you, besides the fact that you believe that adaptability is something that we're born with it?
Yeah, I think,
we can talk both about personal and professional, or whatever space is comfortable for you.
Sure. I think it's probably a mix of sort of the circumstances that I was exposed to, as well as the things that I sort of sought out for myself. Yeah. So I think, probably a little bit of disruption in my early childhood years.
Like many of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? And I think that sort of built a comfort level, or even an appetite maybe for sort of disruption and seeking out new experiences. So I think probably it started there. But then, I also think I've been really lucky in my life to be exposed to really, really sort of unique opportunities. I don't know.
But were you exposed to the opportunities, or when you saw them because you had the appetite for change and adaptability, you went for it?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of both, right? I definitely recognize things that I've had the privilege to be exposed to, but then I also maybe took advantage and really got excited about exploring certain things. So everything from, in my undergrad, I was on a ship for 3 months and I got to travel to like 16 different countries.
I didn't even know this about you.
Yeah.
What ship?
It was called Semester at Sea. It's kind of a known program in the US, but I think that was the first time where I ever really sort of explored the world outside of the US, and that created, I think, an appetite for more in a way that I don't know if it would have been there had I not kind of gone through that journey. And then I've been lucky enough to work on 3 different continents. I've been
and also different industries, right? And different type of companies.
I've pivoted careers. I've led international teams. I've worked with really different management styles. I've started businesses. Yeah. So all of those things, I think, are sort of part of my adaptability story, I guess you could say.
Before COVID, and we're going to talk a little bit about what it takes to adapt during pandemic times, but you were traveling more than most airline pilots that I know. How was that? Tell us maybe why, for those of you who don't know you, why you were traveling so much, and how the travel both helped your adaptability to continue to grow, and maybe, because it's a loop, right? You have to be adaptable to travel so much, but when you travel so much, you have to learn how to be more adaptable. So first of all, why do you travel so much?
Yeah, so I joined ASB back in 2015. As one of the initial hires, I was managing our recruitment process as part of the sort of admission function. So for about 4 years, I was on the road, probably 70% of the time, 6 continents, dozens of different countries. I was hitting the pavement hard, and it was probably one of the most incredible experiences of my life. It was exhausting, but I think the things I got to see and the people I got to meet, and also then just like translate that back to the ASB community. We've had students now from over 50 different countries, all part of that effort. So I think, it wasn't that difficult at the time. You kind of get your energy from it. But it definitely took a toll eventually. And I think I had to sort of reset and think about, was I being overly adaptable, right? What was I sacrificing in that process? So, it's been interesting. And I think the pause, to be perfectly honest, from COVID was very welcomed. But I think, the itch is there again. And I think that's something that I'd be excited to do again if the opportunity.
Let me think a little bit about what you just said about over adaptability. I think you and I probably are both a little bit guilty of stretching ourselves sometimes beyond sustainable norms. And I think people like you and I also had to adjust very, very early in life and learn how to flex my change muscles. I left home when I was 14 and I never went back. I lived also on 3-4 continents. And I feel like you said in the beginning, which I really, really love, we engage with change, but we also have to be willing to change. And this adaptability muscle, even though we're born with it, some of us have a higher capability of practicing more. But you and I both share a very personal story of over adaptability, right? Of over adjusting to situations, sometimes even at the cost of a physical or well-being. You want to touch a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think, constant change is unnerving for your nervous system, quite literally. And I think I did, one of the biggest lessons I've learned in my life is that has very physical implications. So I guess to be perfectly, honest about my story, I had a serious struggle with chronic pain kind of as a result to maybe an overly active nervous system. And it's something
almost high on life all the time, right?
Yeah, I guess you could say. And so that has probably been my biggest teacher so far. And I feel really, really grateful to have kind of come out the other side. But it's taught me a lot about, how do you stay grounded? How do you not sort of lose yourself in the pursuit of, just overexcitement about opportunities? And, yeah, absolutely.
And maybe in both our cases, it taught us that sometimes a break is what you need. I mean, in our case, I think COVID really put a very hard break on your travel of 70% of the time. I never traveled as much as you did, but I also struggled with back pain for a long time. And funny enough, once COVID started, I didn't have back pain anymore. Obviously, I did other things too, but the sensorial nervous system constant high, I think that's a really interesting point for people like you and I who thrive on change, who get high on change, who are always looking for environments where adaptability is the norm, without realizing that maybe sometimes we push it to extremes, right? I was telling a friend of mine the other day, he was considering saying goodbye to his job and to his community. And he said, I know you talk about cognitive readiness, but I think we also need to think about emotional readiness. And I'm trying right now to process the situation that I think might happen and give myself an emotional readiness, pathway. And I caught myself thinking, what's the big deal? So what? You change continents, you change lives, you change a job. And then I was like, I'm a little bit jaded. I think I've done this so many times in my life, and either, like you said, by choice or by luck or by opportunity, I've been in situations where I had to adapt so many times that I almost feel like at some point I am a bit too jaded. I'm a bit too insensitive. I'm a bit too, it's easy to say goodbye. And maybe that's not always the right thing. Maybe this over adaptability that you talked about sometimes is dangerous to our own well-being.
Yeah, I think that's a totally fair point. I think, I've had to work really hard to kind of reconnect with what's important to me and sort of what keeps me grounded, so that I maybe don't lose my way again.
Yeah.
And that's been, I think, a really important part of my process. But it's also been so fascinating to see sort of how our brains actually adapt, right?
Yes.
I think chronic pain is kind of a really fascinating, almost like case study in adaptability, because a lot of this stuff actually kind of gets stored in our brain, and you actually have to work really hard to kind of unlearn some of these triggers. And so sort of watching my process of sort of, the neuroscience behind how our brains actually adapt to change has been super fascinating, and maybe that's for another day. But I think it's
so. I'm not gonna talk too much about this because neither you or I are experts in this field. But the only thing that I do want to say, so when I started coming up with the top 10 SMART skills, one of the things that I wanted to understand is emotional maturity, for example. And then I also wanted to understand how people react to stress, because our students are exposed to a lot of stress. We are exposed to a lot of stress. So I started to study stress from a biochemistry perspective, because I also wanted to understand the science behind some of the if you want, the triggers, the reactions. So I think there's a fascinating field for people who are a lot more qualified than you and I to talk about it. But at least what I can say is I really want to encourage people to look also at the science of the SMART skills, right? Because it's not just, one of my students told me at the beginning of the semester, I said, no offense, Prof, but this is a little bit fluff. And I was like, it could be fluff, but I lived on this planet long enough to know that if the job is easy, the people are not, and most of the problem comes from the SMART skills, maybe it's not as fluff as we think.
Yeah, and also I think like it just also comes back to building our self-awareness around some of this stuff. So if we're even thinking about, advice for people that maybe, are thinking about how do they become more adaptable, or how do they find a little bit more ease and grace and change, I think building your self-awareness around your comfort zones is like step number one, right? And really simple stuff, like what happens when somebody changes dinner plans on you, or what happens when your boss asks
you react to that?
Absolutely. And I think just starting there, and then knowing
with small
that
changes,
small changes lead to big changes. Like it doesn't have to be some huge transformational thing.
Not everything has to be a global pandemic to flex your muscle.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, thinking about that, and then just thinking about simple ways to kind of get out of your comfort zone. And I think starting to say yes as a default more than no is a great kind of starting point.
I love two things that you said besides everything else, but there's grace in change, and small changes lead to big changes. So let me ask you a little bit about maybe we already talked a little bit about this, but can you think of a positive or even negative example of how adaptability helped you or helped people that you saw in your organization? I would like to provide the audience of this project some examples that they can relate to. So when I was asked why did I choose the people that I chose for this book, and how come I chose, no offense, but ordinary people, right? People who are not famous or people who are not celebrities. And for me, you are my celebrity. But I thought that if we write the book from the perspective of somebody like you and I, people that we work with every day, it's a lot more relatable. So I'm looking for an example of somebody like you who experienced adaptability, either negative or positive.
Yeah, I think, ASB's been the best kind of sandbox playground to sort of see adaptability at in progress, so to speak. So I think we've really attracted a lot of very adaptable people. I think by the nature of a startup, you're going to kind of self-select in that way,
and by the nature of the narrative, the way we put the narrative forward, right? We're all for change. We're disruptive. We're unconventional.
Yeah, and so I think, one of the ways that's come out really positively in terms of what I've seen here is just our ability to really embrace diversity. So if you think about our faculty and our staff coming from all over the world, our students coming from over 50 different countries at this point, I don't think, you can do that without being hyper adaptable. And I think that's been, having a really rich, diverse environment is a positive. That's why I'm here.
That's why most of us are here. Yeah. But I also have to say, you mentioned diversity. I also think that, and I said this in one of the other episodes where we talk about multiple perspectives, which is very much encompasses diversity. But I think we glorify diversity without talking honestly about how difficult diversity is, right? And that's why adaptability comes into place to support multiple perspectives, because you cannot say, wow, it's so much fun to be surrounded by 50 nationalities and 50 different cultures, and then you clash because the way I speak or the way I engage or the way you eat and I don't know, socialize, it does create a lot of room for friction, and that's why, once again, the people are not easy. How does adaptability help diversity? Because I think that we all have I think you mentioned to me in the past, our windows of tolerance is different. You said that, and that really stuck with me.
Yeah, I think, we are here on this earth to learn from other people and to grow from our differences. And so even though it can be extremely uncomfortable, as you said, it's not always pretty, I think the richness we get from being in environments that make us think differently, that kind of push us out of our comfort zones, are what kind of that's what evolves our humanity. So I think, adaptability isn't this end product, it's a process, right? Absolutely. And it's not always comfortable. In fact, change rarely is. But I think, being in an environment that forces you to see multiple perspectives, to have to adapt to how other people do things, I think that's what makes it all worth it. I think on the flip side, if we're talking about maybe not negatives, but things that we need to be conscious of and maybe sensitive to, is the sort of speed at which we're expected to adapt, or expecting other people to adapt. And I think particularly around things like new technologies and digital transformation, this is something that I've been really mindful of, in organizations where we have people from different generations, we have people from very different sort of backgrounds. How quickly are we expecting people to adapt new technologies? For example, we have like hyper adaptable people in the organization, and then people that their window of tolerance for change is going to look really different. And how do we sort of make sure that we're not leaving people behind?
And I think for the entire planet, COVID was a massive exercise to test this window of tolerance for adaptability. If you look back at your journey, your professional journey, your personal journey, since you mentioned that, we want to talk a little bit about how COVID helped us understand better adaptability. What's your take on it? What was your journey in the past almost 2 years? What did you learn about yourself, your community, your world?
I think that it definitely put things in perspective around the people that I was going to stay close to. I think it sort of, for a lot of people, narrowed down your universe bubble. Yeah, yep, absolutely. And so I think that was really interesting to sort of, and there were some surprises there, definitely. I think I realized that I'm probably a little bit more introverted, and I fully enjoyed kind of working from home. I didn't expect that, so there was a lot of surprises there, but it really did force me to kind of slow down, to stop, to reflect. There was a lot of healing that took place in that 2 years. And I don't know if I would have gotten there otherwise had I not been forced. So I know there's been a ton of suffering and pain. I am extremely grateful for sort of what COVID allowed me to reflect on and to sort of sit with. So it's been an overall positive experience for me. And I think there's some huge takeaways that are going to sort of
follow you through.
Yeah, definitely.
I feel that when it happened and we had to move overnight into a whole new work environment, which is working from home, and I that's why I really love your comment on the windows of tolerance is different, and the capacity to adapt for various people is different. And for me, I've studied how multiple generations interact with each other and interact with different tools. And it's not always a generational thing. You can find a very, very young people who are very resistant to change. You can find a lot more senior people who are very tolerant for change. But I think this idea, I love the fact that you talk that adaptability is a process that can stretch you sometimes to over flexibility. for me, what COVID meant was a chance to understand what slowing down my infernal rhythm would look like, and realizing that it's still great. It's still good. Just because I'm not traveling 20, days a month, it doesn't mean that my life is not exciting. Because I think maybe for people who get a little bit too high on this chase, it's also, well, what if I don't do enough, right? What if I don't travel enough? What if I don't cover enough? So before we wrap up, which I don't want to, but I feel like we should, do you have any advice for people who are still trying to learn how to flex their adaptability muscles? Do you have any advice for people who are still very much early in the process of learning how to adapt?
Yeah, I think, I talked a little bit about sort of building that self-awareness and just paying a little bit more attention to how you react to certain things. And I think it all kind of starts with that.
Yeah.
I think, part of what I love about ASB and what I encourage people is sort of seek out, if it's not here, similar sort of opportunities to be in a safe place, to be exposed to new things, to experiment, to, I guess, find opportunities where you can safely sort of flex some of those change muscles.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You have to find a safe place to experiment change.
Yeah.
I love that. It's, I think maybe that's why we find so many people like you and I who naturally get attracted to come to ASB, because we are looking for change. But like you said in the beginning, change is also scary. So finding this sandbox, I think you called it in the beginning, this playground where you can try to see how flexible you are, how adaptable you are, how willing you are to change. And before we close this interview, I tell our students all the time, and it's interesting, Emily brings the students in the program, and then I take them in the first semester, so we have almost like a immediate, exactly, instant handoff. And I always tell students, you are going to be so challenged by the amount of change that you're going to get exposed to. And every single one of them underestimates it. And they're like, but I dealt with change all my life. I am so, well prepared for this. And they come here and they are not. And I think what I'm going to take away from this interview with you is that adaptability is a process. And you could be early in the process and feel very confident that you're very adaptable, until you meet a situation that is going to push you forward in the process. And you're going to say, holy guacamole.
I mean, I think it's a lifelong process. I don't think you ever master adaptability, because tomorrow the world could change again.
Oh, please don't.
Your situation can change constantly. So I think you can build up this sort of comfort in the discomfort, and it can become easier for you. But I don't think we ever master adaptability. I think it's lifelong work.
And we are a work in progress, like so many of the people I interview for this project. Well, thank you so very much, Emily.
You're welcome.
Once again, a highly enlightening session. This was a lesson, a masterclass in adaptability by none of the other, the master of adaptability, Emily Preiss. Thank you so very much, everybody, for being part of another episode of The Job is Easy, The People Are Not, Top 10 Smart Skills to Make People Better. I think we're already, like Emily said, work in progress, so just a little bit of change might help us. See you next time, and thank you so very much.